Pittsburgh, 1897. A mahogany desk separates two men who have changed the world. Outside the window, smokestacks pierce the gray sky, and the hum of machinery fills the air. Every factory in this city runs on alternating current. Every light bulb glows because of patents belonging to the tall, gaunt man sitting across from George Westinghouse. The industrialist looks pale. His hands tremble as he pushes a document across the polished wood. This contract entitles Nikola Tesla to $2.50 for every horsepower generated by his motors. By now, the debt has grown to $12 million. In today's currency, that figure exceeds $1 billion. Westinghouse clears his throat. Nikola, if you don't release me from this contract, everything collapses. Everything we built together. The entire system dies with this company. The Serbian engineer says nothing. His dark eyes study the paper as though it were a circuit diagram. The silence stretches. Outside, a steam whistle screams. "George," he finally says, "you believed in me when everyone else tapped their temples and laughed. How much is that worth?" He picks up the contract. His long fingers grip the paper. Then, without ceremony, he tears it in half. Again, he tosses the pieces onto the desk like discarded napkins. That much. Westinghouse stares at the scattered fragments. His mouth opens, closes. No words come. In that single gesture, the inventor throws away a fortune that would have made him one of the richest men in America. He will never recover financially. He will die alone in a hotel room, feeding pigeons from his window, while the world he illuminated forgets his name. But to understand why a Serbian immigrant would discard $1 billion as casually as a used tissue, we must travel back 40 years. To a night when lightning split the sky over a small village, and a midwife spoke a prophecy that would prove both wrong and right. The village of Smiljan clings to the hills of what was then the Austrian Empire, now Croatia. Stone houses huddle together against the mountain winds. The Orthodox Church stands at the center, its bells silent on this particular night. No one rings bells during a storm like this. It is nearly midnight, caught between the 9th and 10th of July, 1856. The sky has become a battlefield. Lightning tears through the darkness every few seconds. Thunder rolls across the mountains like cannon fire. The air smells of ozone and wet straw. Inside the stone house beside the church, Nikola Tesla screams. She has done this 3 times before, brought 3 daughters into the world. But this labor is different, harder. The child does not want to come. The midwife works by candlelight. The flames gutter and dance with each thunderclap. She is an old woman, superstitious in the way of mountain folk, and this storm unsettles her deeply. Finally, at the exact moment when one day dies and another is born, the baby arrives. A boy, thin, pale, with eyes that seem too large for his face. He does not cry immediately. He simply looks around, as though taking inventory of this strange new world. The midwife crosses herself. "A child of darkness," she whispers, "born in such a night." Nikola Tesla, exhausted but fierce, pulls her son to her breast. "No," she says. Her voice cuts through the thunder. "A child of light." The baby's father, Milutin Tesla, stands in the doorway. He is the village priest, a stern man with a stern God. He has already decided this boy's future. The child will follow him into the church. There is no other path. He does not know that this squalling infant will grow to harness the very lightning that rages outside, that this child will illuminate cities, power factories, change the course of human history. But there is another child in this house tonight, a boy of nearly 6, sleeping fitfully in the next room despite the thunder. His name is Dane, and he is everything a father could want. Handsome, brilliant, charming, destined for greatness. He is the sun around which this family orbits. The newborn Nikola will grow up in his shadow. In the Tesla household, there was already one remarkable child. It was not Nikola. The boy grows up peculiar. Everyone in Smiljan knows it. He counts his steps obsessively. He cannot bear to touch other people's hair. The sight of pearls makes him physically ill, and peaches trigger a revulsion he cannot explain. But these are minor oddities compared to what happens after his brother's accident. Dane Tesla is 12 years old, and everything Nikola is not. Where the younger brother is thin and sickly, Dane glows with health. Where Nikola retreats into books and solitary experiments, Dane charms everyone he meets. Their father makes no secret of his preference. One evening, 7-year-old Nikola tries to share something at dinner. "I made something," he says quietly. "A meal. With beetles." His father frowns. "With beetles?" June bugs turn the wheel, like a water mill, but you torment God's creatures for amusement. Go to your room. The boy goes. He has learned that arguments change nothing in this house. Then comes the day that changes everything. The details remain unclear even a century later. A horse. A fall. What is certain is that Dane Tesla, golden child, beloved son, pride of the family, dies at the age of 12. Nikola is 7 years old. He watches them carry his brother's body into the house. He watches his mother collapse. He watches his father age a decade in a single afternoon. That night, the visions begin. Flashes of light explode across his field of vision whenever someone speaks a word. He sees his brother's face floating before him, sometimes accusing, sometimes simply present. He discovers he can close his eyes and enter complete, vivid worlds of his own creation. These are not dreams. They happen while he is awake. Modern physicians suggest several possibilities. Synesthesia, perhaps. Eidetic memory of an extreme degree. Possibly what we now call obsessive-compulsive disorder. The boy knows none of these words. He knows only that his mind has become both his greatest tool and his most difficult companion. He can visualize machines in perfect three-dimensional detail, rotate them, test them, find their flaws, all without touching pencil to paper. But he cannot stop counting, cannot stop calculating, cannot escape the images of his dead brother that haunt his nights. His mother finds him one afternoon standing motionless in his room, eyes closed, lips moving silently. "Nikola, are you sleeping standing up?" "Quiet." He whispers without opening his eyes. "I am running a turbine." "What turbine?" "There is nothing here." His eyes open. He smiles. "There is now. It works." She does not understand. No one understands. But Nikola Tesla recognizes something in her unusual son. She never learned to read, yet she can recite any book after hearing it once. Her mind holds everything it encounters. Her son's mind will prove even more remarkable. It will hold the future. But first, he must survive the present. And the present means growing up in the shadow of a dead boy who becomes more perfect with each passing year. Nikola cannot compete with a ghost, so he stops trying. To get permission for his dreams, he will first have to nearly die. The year is 1873. Nikola is 17 years old, thin as a rail, brilliant beyond measure, and absolutely determined to become an engineer. His father is equally determined that he will become a priest. They have argued about this for years. Nikola Tesla sees the church as the only worthy calling. His son sees equations, circuits, the hidden architecture of nature itself. Then cholera comes to Smiljan. The disease strikes fast and hard. One day the boy is arguing with his father. The next, he is burning with fever, too weak to lift his head. The village doctor shakes his head. There is nothing to be done. 9 months. For 9 months, Nikola Tesla lies between life and death. His body wastes away until he is little more than bones and skin. His visions intensify, becoming so vivid he can no longer distinguish them from reality. His father sits by his bedside night after night, praying to a God who seems not to be listening. He has already buried one child. He cannot bury another. One night, the boy's eyes flutter open. His voice comes out as barely a whisper. "Father, if I survive, will you let me go?" Milutin leans closer. "Go where?" "To grass. To study engineering." The priest closes his eyes. He has fought this battle for years. But none of that matters now. His son is dying. "Yes," he says, "just survive." A week later, the fever breaks. The doctors call it a miracle. The young man who rises from that sick bed has a different interpretation. He believes his mind conquered the disease. He believes willpower itself can overcome physical reality. This conviction will shape the rest of his life, for better and for worse. The Austrian city of Graz, 1875. The Polytechnic Institute rises from the medieval streets like a temple to progress. Young men from across the empire come here to learn the secrets of the new industrial age. Among them is a tall, thin Serbian with haunted eyes. He owns 2 suits, both shabby. He knows no one. He has barely enough money for food. None of this matters. Within weeks, his professors are speaking his name with awe. He works 20 hours a day. He attends every lecture. He completes every assignment before it is due. At the end of his first year, he has earned the highest grades in every subject. Then comes the second year, and the cards. It starts innocently enough. A game of Tarok in a cafe, a few coins wagered. But for a mind that cannot do anything in moderation, gambling proves as addictive as any drug. One night, he sits across from 3 older students in a smoke-filled room. The pile of coins in front of him has been shrinking for hours. His hands shake. His mind, usually so disciplined, screams at him to stop. He cannot stop. "Another hand," he says. By morning, he has lost his entire stipend. By the end of the month, he has borrowed from everyone who will lend to him. By the end of the semester, he cannot pay his fees. He flees Graz without a diploma. He hides in the city of Maribor, working as a draftsman, haunting the gambling dens at night. His family believes him dead. When the police finally catch up with him, they deport him back to his village as a vagrant. His father is dying by then, worn out by grief and disappointment. Nikola Tesla passes away without ever fully reconciling with his peculiar, brilliant, broken son. The young man stands at the graveside and makes a silent vow. He will redeem himself. He will become something magnificent. But first, he must escape this village, this country, this continent. He will never earn a formal degree. Every title he eventually holds will be honorary, granted decades later. The vagrant they expelled will illuminate half the world. But that is years away. For now he is lost. Budapest, 1881. The telephone has arrived in the Hungarian capital, and with it, opportunities for young engineers. The former student from Graz finds work at the new telephone exchange. His mind, however, is elsewhere. It has been working on a problem for years. How to create an electric motor without the sparking, inefficient brushes that plague direct current systems. He knows the answer exists. He can feel it. But every time he reaches for it, the solution slips away. Then his body begins to fail. The breakdown arrives without warning. His senses, always acute, become unbearably sharp. He can hear a watch ticking 3 rooms away. Sunlight causes physical pain. He cannot eat, cannot sleep, cannot work. For weeks, he lies in his darkened room, waiting for either recovery or death. Then, slowly, the crisis passes. He ventures outside again, forcing himself to walk through the city parks. This February 1882, the sun is setting over Budapest. He walks through the city park with his friend Antal Szigeti, reciting from memory the poetry of Goethe. And then it happens. He stops in the middle of the path. His eyes go wide. His hand shoots out and grabs Szigeti's arm. "Watch," he cries. "Do you see it?" Szigeti sees nothing but trees and benches. What am I supposed to see? The Serbian falls to his knees. His walking stick scratches furiously in the sand, tracing lines and circles. A rotating field. 2 currents, displaced in phase. The rotor turns by itself. No commutator, no brushes. "I only see sand," Szigeti says carefully. The engineer smiles. It is the first genuine smile he has produced in months. "I see the future." He stands there as twilight falls, refining the image in his mind, testing each component. By the time Szigeti leads him home, he has worked out every detail, the stator design, the phase relationships, the exact configuration that will make alternating current practical, the technology that will illuminate cities and drive the modern world has appeared in a flash of insight on a February evening. 6 years will pass before anyone else sees what he saw that day. 6 years of poverty, struggle, and the frustration of carrying a revolution in your head while the world refuses to listen. But he is patient now. The fever has broken, the vision has come, and for the first time since his brother died, he knows exactly who he is. He is the man who will give the world light. He just needs to find someone willing to listen. The answer waited across an ocean, in a city that never stopped reaching toward the sky. The steamship docked in New York Harbor on the 6th of June, 1884. Among the passengers stumbling down the gangplank was a tall, thin man with a thick Serbian accent and pockets that contained exactly 4 cents. He had started the journey with considerably more. Somewhere between Paris and the Atlantic, thieves had relieved him of his luggage, his money, and his ticket. He had talked his way onto the ship through sheer desperation, arriving in the new world with nothing but the clothes on his back, a slim volume of poetry, a letter of recommendation, and the contents of his extraordinary mind. The letter was addressed to Thomas Edison. The Serbian stood on the dock and looked up at Manhattan. The buildings seemed impossibly tall, reaching toward a sky hazed with coal smoke and ambition. He had dreamed about this city during the long years in Budapest and Paris. Now he was here, penniless, friendless, knowing no one, 28 years old, and carrying a revolution in his head. The man he was going to meet had already conquered America. Thomas Alva Edison, the wizard of Menlo Park, had given the nation the phonograph, the practical incandescent light bulb, and the direct current electrical system that was slowly illuminating the cities of the eastern seaboard. He was rich, famous, celebrated in newspapers from coast to coast. He was also profoundly wrong about the future of electricity. The meeting took place in Edison's laboratory, a cluttered space that smelled of machine oil. The famous man barely looked up from his workbench as his visitor was announced. "They tell me you have ideas about alternating current," Edison said without preamble. The Serbian nodded eagerly. "Not merely ideas, sir. Complete solutions. Rotating magnetic fields, polyphase systems." Edison raised a hand, cutting him off. "Young man, I have spent 10 years building direct current systems. Alternating current is dangerous, impractical, and has no future. But mathematically, to hell with mathematics. I believe in what works." The visitor swallowed his arguments. He needed this job. He could prove his theories later. He did not yet understand that Edison was incapable of admitting error. The wizard had built an empire on direct current and would defend it against any threat, using any means necessary. The immigrant was hired. He would work harder than anyone Edison had ever employed, and he would learn, through bitter experience, the difference between American promises and American humor. Edison's machine works occupied a sprawling facility in Lower Manhattan. Hundreds of workers labored there, building the generators and distribution systems that were bringing electric light to wealthy neighborhoods. It was the most advanced electrical workshop in the world. The new employee threw himself into the work with characteristic intensity. 18 hours a day, sometimes 20, he redesigned generators, solved problems that had stumped Edison's team for years. Within months, Edison himself took notice. The Serbian was given increasingly important projects. He delivered on every one. Then came the promise. According to the account that would later become legend, Edison offered $50,000 if the engineer could improve the efficiency of his direct current generators. It was an astronomical sum, equivalent to nearly $1.5 million in modern currency. The immigrant worked for months. He redesigned 24 generators, implementing improvements that increased their output significantly. When he finished, he presented his work and requested the promised payment. Edison laughed. "Tesla, you don't understand American humor." The words hung in the air. The Serbian had worked himself to exhaustion. He had delivered results that exceeded all expectations, and he had been paid nothing but a joke. He resigned that day. The year was 1885, and the man who would illuminate the world found himself digging ditches for $2 a day. The irony cut deep. Here was the creator of the alternating current motor, the man who held the key to electrical transmission over vast distances. And he was shoveling dirt in the streets of New York, laying cables for the direct current system he knew was obsolete. He dug trenches through summer heat and autumn rain. He lived in boarding houses that smelled of cabbage and despair. He counted his pennies and dreamed of laboratories he could not afford. But he did not stop thinking. He never stopped thinking. He just needed someone to believe in him. That someone arrived in 1888. George Westinghouse was everything Edison was not. Where Edison was self-taught and proudly anti-intellectual, Westinghouse held patents based on rigorous engineering principles. Where Edison relied on trial and error, Westinghouse believed in theory first. Where Edison saw competitors as enemies, Westinghouse saw potential partners. He had made his fortune from the air brake, a device that allowed trains to stop safely at high speeds, and he had been watching the development of alternating current with intense interest. When he heard about a Serbian engineer who had built a working motor using alternating current, he traveled to New York personally. The meeting took place in a small laboratory the Serbian had established with borrowed money. The equipment was modest, but the demonstration was extraordinary. The motor hummed to life, its rotors spinning smoothly without the sparking mechanisms that plagued direct current machines. Westinghouse watched in silence. When the demonstration ended, he turned to the engineer. "How much for the bands?" $1 million in cash, plus $2.50 for every horsepower generated by my motors. It was an audacious demand. Any sensible businessman would have negotiated. Westinghouse stood and extended his hand. Done. In that moment, everything changed. The Serbian had found his champion, a man who understood the science and had the resources to wage war against the most powerful figure in American industry. The war of currents had begun. Edison learned of the Westinghouse deal within weeks. His response was swift, ruthless, and utterly without scruple. The campaign began with animals. In laboratories and public demonstrations across the country, Edison's employees began electrocuting dogs, cats, and horses with alternating current. Journalists were invited to watch. The message was simple. This is what the Westinghouse system does. This is the danger they want to bring into your homes. Stray dogs were collected from the streets. They were placed on metal plates connected to generators. The current flowed. The animals died. The newspapers reported every gruesome detail. But Edison wanted more. He wanted alternating current associated not just with dead animals, but with dead humans. He wanted people to hear those two letters and think of execution. He found his opportunity in the electric chair. New York State was looking for a more humane method of capital punishment than hanging. Edison, publicly opposed to the death penalty, privately lobbied for the use of alternating current in the new device. His logic was perverse but effective. If the state used this current to kill criminals, no one would want it in their homes. The first execution took place on August 6, 1890. The condemned man was William Kemmler, convicted of murdering his common-law wife. The execution was a disaster. The first jolt was insufficient. Kemmler survived, moaning and convulsing. The executioners had to recharge the generator and try again. 8 minutes of agony followed, the smell of burning flesh filling the chamber, witnesses fainting at the spectacle. One reporter described it as far worse than hanging. Edison expressed public horror while privately celebrating. The newspapers were filled with stories about the dangers of the Westinghouse system. His campaign was working. He even tried to introduce a new verb into the English language, to be Westinghoused, meaning to be executed by electricity. It did not catch on, but the attempt revealed his commitment to destroying his rival.
The Serbian responded to this campaign of terror with something unexpected: trust. Instead of attacking Edison, instead of launching his own campaign of fear, he demonstrated the safety of alternating current using the most convincing evidence possible: himself. Before audiences of scientists, journalists, and curious citizens, he allowed high-frequency current to pass through his body. He held glowing glass tubes in his bare hands, illuminating them without wires, without apparent danger. The effect was spectacular. Here was this tall, elegant figure, standing in a darkened room, light streaming from tubes in his outstretched hands. The very current Edison claimed would kill was flowing through him harmlessly. It was theater, of course. High-frequency current behaves differently than lower frequencies, and the engineer understood this perfectly. But the public did not need to understand the distinction. What they saw was a man who trusted his own work enough to stake his life on it. In the battle for hearts and minds, demonstrations mattered more than denunciations. Chicago, 1893. The world's Columbian Exposition sprawled across 600 acres of reclaimed swampland on the shore of Lake Michigan. 27 million visitors would pass through its gates, making it the largest public gathering in American history. And it was lit entirely by alternating current. Westinghouse had won the contract to illuminate the fair, underbidding Edison's company by a significant margin. The victory was more than financial. It was symbolic. The Great White City would demonstrate to the world that the Westinghouse system was the future. 200,000 incandescent bulbs illuminated the grounds. Visitors who had never seen electric light gasped at the spectacle. The buildings glowed against the night sky like something from a dream. In the Electricity Building, the Serbian conducted demonstrations that drew crowds throughout the fair. He stood on a platform surrounded by equipment of his own design. The lights dimmed. Silence fell. Then he raised his hands, and light flowed from them. Glass tubes glowed without visible connection to any power source. Electrical discharge danced between metal spheres. The audience watched in amazement as this gaunt figure commanded forces that had terrified humanity since the first bolt split the prehistoric sky. The crowds applauded. The newspapers reported. The scientific community debated. And Thomas Edison, back in New Jersey, knew that he had lost. The war of currents was over. Alternating current had won. The future would be powered not by Edison's system, but by the vision of the immigrant he had cheated out of $50,000. Fire destroyed the laboratory on South Fifth Avenue on the 13th of March, 1895. Years of work vanished in a single night. Prototypes, research notes, equipment that had taken months to build. The cause was never determined. Some suspected arson. Others blamed faulty wiring. The truth disappeared with the ashes. What was lost defied calculation. The engineer had been working on wireless transmission years before anyone else. He had been experimenting with radiation that would later be called X-rays. The prototypes burned. The documentation burned. Discoveries that might have secured his place in history went up in smoke. He visited the ruins the next morning. Witnesses described him as eerily calm. He said nothing for a long time. "I am too grieved to speak," he finally managed. "What can I say?" He walked away. What happened next has been largely forgotten because it complicates the simple narrative of heroes and villains. Edison sent a message to his rival. He offered the use of his own facilities in New Jersey. No strings attached. No conditions. Heard about your fire, Edison reportedly said when they met. Rotten luck. Thank you. To hell with sympathy. You need a laboratory. I have space in West Orange. Use it. The offer was accepted. The arrangement was temporary. The rivalry resumed soon enough. But for a brief moment, the two titans acknowledged something that transcended their conflict: respect for the work, if not for each other. Niagara Falls had thundered over its precipice for 12,000 years. Native peoples had worshipped it. European explorers had marveled at its power. No one had succeeded in harnessing it. Then came the engineers. The Niagara Falls Power Project was the most ambitious undertaking of the 19th century. An international commission reviewed proposals from across the globe. The winner would prove that electricity could be transmitted over distances previously thought impossible. The commission chose the alternating current system. Construction took years. Workers blasted tunnels through solid rock, built powerhouses that resembled Greek temples, installed turbines of unprecedented size. On November 16, 1896, the switch was thrown. Electricity generated at Niagara Falls traveled 26 miles to the city of Buffalo. For the first time in history, power was transmitted over such a distance without significant loss. Streetlights flickered to life. Factories hummed with energy drawn from falling water. The Serbian traveled to Niagara to witness his triumph. He stood at the observation point, looking down at the falls he had dreamed of harnessing since childhood. A journalist approached him. "What are you thinking, looking at your achievement?" The answer came slowly. "I am thinking of a boy of 5 in Smiljan who saw a picture of this waterfall and told his uncle, 'Someday I will make that water work for me.'" "What did your uncle say?" A smile crossed the engineer's gaunt face. He laughed. No one was laughing now. A bronze statue stands at Niagara Falls today. Tourists photograph it without knowing the full story, without understanding what it cost him to stand where the statue now stands. By 1896, he had won every battle and lost everything that mattered. He had no family. He had few friends. His money was draining away into experiments that produced wonders, but not income. The first signs of the obsessive behaviors that would define his later years were emerging. The alternating current system would generate billions of dollars over the coming century. The man who created it would see almost none of that wealth. He had chosen ideas over money. He would make that choice again and again, until there was nothing left to sacrifice. But he was not finished. The greatest triumphs were behind him, but the most ambitious dreams still lay ahead. He was already thinking beyond power transmission, beyond motors and generators. He was thinking about wireless. He was thinking about broadcasting energy through the air itself. He was thinking about changing the world again. And this time, the world would not cooperate. He was tall, elegant, immaculately dressed in suits that cost more than most workers earned in a month. His dark eyes held secrets, and his accent lent every word an air of mystery. He moved through the salons of New York society like a figure from a romantic novel. Women adored him. They sent letters, invitations, offers both subtle and explicit. Actresses sought his company. Heiresses maneuvered for his attention. He was, by any measure, one of the most eligible bachelors in America. He died without ever knowing physical intimacy. This is the mystery that biographers have puzzled over for more than a century. Here was a man who seemed to have everything necessary for romantic success: looks, fame, intellect, that indefinable quality that draws others close. Yet he formed no lasting romantic attachment, took no wife, produced no children. The explanations offered over the years range from the clinical to the romantic. Perhaps his desires were simply wired differently. Perhaps the trauma of his brother's death created wounds too deep for intimacy to heal. Perhaps the peculiarities of his mind made closeness impossible. He offered his own explanation. Celibacy stimulates the creative faculties, he told interviewers. He claimed that certain energies, properly channeled, became intellectual power. The sacrifice of physical pleasure was the price of mental achievement. But sacrifice implies desire. The question remains, was this a choice freely made, or a condition reluctantly accepted? The closest he came to love was a woman he could never have. Katherine Johnson was the wife of Robert Underwood Johnson, editor of the Century magazine, and one of the engineer's few genuine friends. She was intelligent, cultured, passionate about poetry and music. They met in the early 1890s and remained close for decades. The letters she wrote to him survive. They are not the letters of a casual friend. "My dearest, when will you come? The house is empty without your voice. Robert misses you. I miss you more than missing." She loved him. This much is clear from the correspondence, from the memoirs of those who knew them. Whether she ever declared this openly, whether there were moments of confession, history does not record. What it records is his response: warmth without passion, friendship without crossing the line. He visited the Johnsons regularly. He dined with them, attended concerts with them, spent holidays in their company. He wrote letters that were affectionate but never romantic. He maintained, with absolute discipline, the boundary between friendship and something more. Perhaps this was the only relationship he could sustain, intimate enough to matter, distant enough to be safe. His other peculiarities made conventional romance nearly impossible. He could not bear to touch pearls. The sight of them triggered revulsion he could neither explain nor control. Women who wore pearl jewelry found themselves dismissed from his presence without explanation. One secretary learned this the hard way. She arrived at work wearing small pearl earrings, a gift from her mother. The engineer took one look and turned pale. "Miss, I cannot be in the same room with those. But they're just earrings. They're not even real. That is immaterial. Please go home and change." She went. She returned an hour later, and the workday proceeded as if nothing had happened. He also could not tolerate the touch of human hair, or any number that did not divide evenly by 3. These were not preferences, but compulsions, rules that governed his existence with iron rigidity. How does one conduct a romance when a lover's hair might trigger revulsion? How does one build intimacy when touch itself is dangerous? And so he remained alone, not unhappy, perhaps, but incomplete. A man who understood the flow of electrons through copper wire, but could not navigate the simpler current between two human hearts. In the end, there would be love. It would come from the sky, on gray and white wings. But that was still years away. Mark Twain was among the regular visitors to the laboratory in those years. The great American writer, whose white suits and wild hair made him recognizable on any street, found in the Serbian engineer a kindred spirit. They made an odd pair. Twain was garrulous, profane, perpetually performing. The engineer was reserved, precise, more comfortable with equations than small talk. Yet somehow they connected. Twain suffered from digestive troubles that plagued him throughout his life. The engineer, always eager to demonstrate his latest work, suggested a solution. "Stand on this platform," he said, indicating a metal disc connected to an elaborate apparatus. "The vibrations will stimulate your system." Twain, game for anything, stepped onto the platform. The machine hummed to life. The disc began to vibrate at a calculated frequency. For 90 seconds, the rider stood there, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Nikola," he said, his voice strained, "where is your—" He did not finish the sentence. He leaped from the platform and ran with an urgency that left no doubt about the machine's effectiveness. When he returned, considerably relieved, he found his host making notes. "Remarkable results," the engineer observed. The frequency was precisely calibrated. "For making a man embarrass himself," Twain interrupted. "Very scientific." They remained friends. Colorado Springs sits at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, 6,000 feet above sea level. The air is thin, the storms spectacular, and in 1899, it was one of the few places where a man could conduct electrical experiments on an unprecedented scale. The engineer arrived in May with vast ambitions. He had come to test theories about wireless transmission that could not be evaluated in a city laboratory. He needed space, power, and isolation. He built something unlike anything that had existed before. The main structure featured a wooden tower rising 80 feet above the prairie, topped by a copper ball that gleamed in the mountain sunlight. Inside, a massive coil capable of generating millions of volts occupied the center of the building. When the experiments began, the results exceeded all expectations. Artificial bolts shot from the tower, extending more than 100 feet into the air. Thunder rolled across the plains, audible 15 miles away. Butterflies caught in the electrical field became surrounded by halos of glowing discharge. Local horses refused to approach the laboratory. Their metal shoes conducted stray currents, delivering shocks with every step. Farmers complained of sparks jumping from their pumps and fences. Then came the night that silenced the entire city. The engineer was testing the limits of his equipment, pushing more power through the system than ever before. The coils sang with energy. The tower crackled, and then the generator at the El Paso Power Company exploded. Colorado Springs went dark. The power company manager arrived in a fury. "You destroyed our generator." "Yes," the engineer agreed calmly. "Magnificent, was it not? You left 10,000 people without electricity. Temporary. You will repair the generator, and I will pay for damages. But first, one more experiment." He never lost his capacity for wonder, even when that wonder inconvenienced thousands. Something else happened in Colorado Springs, something that would follow him for the rest of his life. One night, alone with his equipment, he detected signals on his receiver. Regular pulses, too structured to be natural static, too consistent to be accidental. He believed he was receiving communications from another planet. "I have been the first to hear the greeting of one world to another," he wrote later. Modern scientists have proposed explanations. He may have detected radio emissions from Jupiter's moon Io, a phenomenon not understood until decades later. He may have picked up interference from other early experiments. But he believed, until his dying day, that he had made contact with intelligence beyond Earth. Colorado Springs gave him one more thing, something simpler. He began feeding the birds that gathered near the laboratory, scattering grain for the pigeons that landed on the prairie. It was a small kindness, insignificant beside his cosmic ambitions. He would remember those birds. He would seek them out again, years later, when everything else had failed. The tower rose on Long Island like something from another world. 200 feet tall, topped by a copper dome that gleamed in the sunlight, Wardenclyffe was designed to be the first node in a global wireless network. The official purpose was transatlantic communication, a way to send messages without expensive cables. But this was merely the public explanation. The true purpose was grander. The engineer wanted to transmit power itself through the earth and atmosphere. He envisioned a world where energy flowed freely, available to anyone with a simple receiving device. No more wires. No more generating stations. Just energy everywhere, for everyone. Free energy. That was the dream. The financier J.P. Morgan provided the initial funding, $150,000. He expected a return on his investment, a profitable enterprise that would dominate international communication. He did not expect to be told that the project had evolved into something that could not generate profit because the energy would be free. If anyone can draw power from your tower, Morgan asked, where exactly would I put the meter? The question contained its own answer. Meanwhile, a young Italian named Guglielmo Marconi was making headlines. In December of 1901, Marconi announced that he had transmitted a wireless signal across the Atlantic from England to Newfoundland. The signal was simple, just 3 clicks representing a letter in code. But it proved that wireless communication over vast distances was possible. The announcement devastated the Long Island project. Investors began having doubts. If Marconi could achieve transatlantic transmission with modest equipment, why fund an elaborate tower? The market would go to whoever could commercialize first. The engineer wrote desperate letters to Morgan, explaining that his system was fundamentally different, capable of achievements Marconi could not imagine. Morgan did not respond. Construction slowed, then stopped. Workers were laid off. The great tower stood incomplete. By 1905, the project was dead. The tower stood empty, its equipment rusting, its promise unfulfilled. The structure remained until 1917, when it was demolished to pay debts. The dream of free wireless energy dissipated into the Long Island air. There is a bitter footnote to this story. Marconi's system used patents that bore suspicious resemblance to earlier work. The Italian had not created radio so much as commercialized it, building on foundations laid by others. In 1909, Marconi received the Nobel Prize in Physics for his contributions to wireless communication. The Serbian engineer learned the news in his cramped New York quarters. A reporter found him there, seeking comment. How do you feel about Marconi's Nobel Prize? A long pause. Marconi is a good fellow. Let him continue. He is using 17 of my patents. The engineer sued for priority. The case dragged through courts for decades. In 1943, a few months after his death, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in his favor. His patents had priority. Marconi had built on his work. Justice delivered too late to matter. The world remembered Marconi. The truth became a footnote. He was right. He was first. He received nothing. This pattern would repeat throughout his remaining years. Vision without reward, priority without recognition. He had changed the world. The world had not noticed. The hotels of Manhattan became his temporary homes, each address marking another step in a long descent. Waldorf Astoria first, then the St. Regis, then others less grand. The pattern was always the same. He would arrive with dignity intact, request a room whose number divided evenly by 3, settle into routine. Months would pass. Bills would accumulate. Eventually, management would lose patience. Then came negotiations, pleading, the quiet shame of a man who could not pay his rent. The rituals that had always governed his life now consumed it entirely. 18 napkins at every meal. Not 17, not 19. He would count them before sitting down, and if the number was wrong, he would wait while the waiter corrected the deficiency. 3 circuits around the building before entering. This made him late for appointments, confused observers, generated whispered speculation. But he could not stop. The compulsion was stronger than embarrassment. Handshakes became impossible. The thought of touching another person's hand triggered revulsion. He developed elaborate techniques for avoiding contact. His diet narrowed to almost nothing. Warm milk and honey in the final years, the precise volume calculated before each serving. He was disappearing, one meal at a time. And every day, regardless of weather or health, he kept his appointment with the pigeons. They came to him in the parks of Manhattan. They gathered around his bench in Bryant Park and Madison Square. He brought bags of seed, scattering food with hands that had once commanded artificial thunder. The pigeons knew him. They waited for him. When he was late, they circled the benches where he usually sat. He talked to them as he fed them. Passers-by found this unsettling. An old man in a dated suit, muttering to birds. Another casualty of dreams that had not survived. But for him, these were individuals, recognizable, each with its own personality. He had names for his favorites. Then came the white one. She was different from the others, pure white in a flock of grays, with eyes that seemed to hold something beyond ordinary awareness. She began appearing at his window in the hotel, landing on the sill as if she belonged there. He fell in love. The words seem absurd, applied to a man and a bird. But he used them himself, without embarrassment. I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman, and she loved me. As long as I had her, there was purpose in my life. He let her into his room. He built perches, provided food and water. The hotel staff complained about the mess, about the other birds that followed through the open window. He ignored them. He had found, at last, a creature he could love without fear. One night, she came to his window for the last time. He would later describe what happened in terms that veered into mysticism. She flew to him, and there was a light in her eyes, brilliant and intense. He knew she had come to say goodbye. She died in his hands. When she died, he told a reporter, "Something went out of my life. I knew my work was finished." Perhaps it was the only love his unusual mind could accommodate. Pure, asking nothing but presence. Perhaps it was tenderness, finding its outlet in the only channel available. The pigeons continued to come. He continued to feed them. But something essential had departed. He was waiting now, though for what, he could not have said. The newspapers still sought him out on his birthday. Every July 10th, reporters would make the pilgrimage to whatever hotel currently housed him, notebooks ready, hoping for quotable pronouncements from the aging visionary. He never disappointed them. In his 70s and 80s, he announced creations that seemed to belong to science fiction. A beam capable of destroying 10,000 airplanes at a distance of 250 miles. A method for transmitting power without wires. A technique for photographing thoughts directly from the human brain. The reporters wrote down every word. The headlines appeared the next morning. The scientific community responded with silence or skepticism. He called his most dramatic concept the teleforce, a concentrated stream of particles that could annihilate enemy forces from vast distances. "I have spent my life fighting against war," he explained. "This will make war impossible." The governments of the world showed interest, but only interest. The Soviet Union invited him to develop the technology in Moscow. He declined. Great Britain conducted preliminary discussions. Nothing came of them. The United States military listened politely and did nothing. Perhaps they recognized what he could not admit, that no working prototype existed, that the designs resided entirely in his remarkable mind, that the leap from concept to reality would require resources no one was willing to provide. His claims grew more extravagant with each passing year. He spoke of cosmic rays that could provide unlimited energy. He described motors that seemed to violate accepted principles. The line between visionary and eccentric blurred, then disappeared. Yet some of what he predicted has come to pass. Directed energy weapons are now reality, though less powerful than what he imagined. Wireless power transmission is standard in millions of devices. The principles behind radar, remote control, and countless other technologies trace back to his laboratories. He was wrong about many things, but he was right about enough. There was one episode that revealed more than he perhaps intended. A reporter asked about the Nobel Prize that had been announced and then apparently revoked in 1915, the shared award with Edison that never materialized. The old man's eyes went cold. "I would not share a prize with that man for anything." Whether the story was real or imagined, the bitterness was genuine. Decades had passed, and he still could not forgive. Edison had died in 1931, mourned by a nation that considered him its greatest inventor. Reporters had sought comment from the man who had been his most dangerous rival. The response made headlines for its brutal honesty. Edison was not a scientist. He was someone who held mathematics and theoretical knowledge in contempt. His method was inefficient beyond belief, trying thousands of variations until something worked, when proper theory could have saved 90% of the effort. A pause. The reporters waited. Nevertheless, he was a great man. I respected him. I am glad I knew him. Truth first, then grace. Never the other way around. The Hotel New Yorker rose 43 stories above 34th Street, one of the largest hotels in the world when it opened. Its residents included the famous, the notorious, and the simply wealthy. Room 3327, on the 33rd floor, was modest by the building's standards. But its number divided by 3, and that was what mattered. He moved in during 1934 and never left. The room became his universe, his laboratory, his dining room, his world. He decorated it with photographs of achievements, blueprints of things never built, newspaper clippings that chronicled his rise and fall. Pigeons came and went through windows left permanently open. His income had dwindled to almost nothing. Westinghouse Electric, honoring a debt that could never truly be repaid, sent $125 each month. The Yugoslav government contributed an annual sum, recognizing their native son even as America forgot him. Combined, these amounts barely covered expenses. He had given away a fortune that would be worth $1 billion today. He could not afford a decent meal. The routine of his final years was monastic. Mornings for work, scribbling in notebooks that accumulated around his room. Noon and late afternoon for the pigeons. Evenings for walking, always alone, through streets illuminated by the current he had championed half a century before. He dined at precisely 10 minutes past 8, always alone, always at the same table if the restaurant permitted. The staff knew his requirements: 18 napkins, no round objects in his field of vision, absolute privacy. Sleep came poorly, when it came at all. In the darkness of that small room, he replayed his life, triumphs and failures, discoveries and thefts, faces of people who had believed in him and those who had betrayed him. Mostly he thought about what was to come, not his own future, which was measured in months at most, but the future of the species he had served. He had seen electricity transform the world. He had witnessed technologies he had invented or anticipated become commonplace. But he had also seen the Great War, millions dead in trenches lit by electric light. He had watched darkness gather over Europe again. He had lived long enough to see his gifts turn to purposes he never intended. On January 5, 1943, he told the hotel staff not to disturb him. He hung the appropriate sign on his door and withdrew into his room. 2 days later, a maid named Alice Monahan decided to check on the elderly guest regardless of his instructions. She had not seen him emerge. She had not heard movement. Something was wrong. She was right. He lay in bed, fully dressed, eyes closed, perfectly still. The expression on his face was peaceful. Whatever struggles had marked his life, they had departed before his body did. The doctors said coronary thrombosis. Natural causes. 86 years old, alone in a hotel room, surrounded by notebooks full of ideas the world was not ready to receive. The pigeons continued to gather on his windowsill for days afterward. They did not know he was gone. They only knew that the seed had stopped coming. The body was barely cold when the government arrived. Agents acting under federal authority seized everything in the room. 80 trunks of papers, notebooks, equipment, and personal effects were taken into custody. The official rationale was simple. He had never become a citizen, which made his possessions subject to wartime regulations regarding foreign nationals. The real reason was the weapon he had described for years. The United States, engaged in the greatest conflict in human history, could not afford to let such designs fall into enemy hands. Whether real or theoretical, the papers had to be secured. A physicist from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was assigned to evaluate the technical materials. He spent several days reviewing notebooks, blueprints, the accumulated output of a lifetime. His conclusion disappointed those who had hoped for miracle weapons. The thoughts and efforts during at least the past 15 years were primarily of a speculative and philosophical character, the report stated. Nothing of immediate military value, or so the official conclusion claimed. Questions have lingered ever since. Why seize papers that contain nothing valuable? Why did portions remain classified for decades? Why were some documents never returned to the family? The truth is probably simpler than conspiracy theories suggest. Governments seize documents routinely during wartime. Classification persists through bureaucracy. Not everything hidden is significant, but the questions remain. Somewhere in those 80 trunks, there might have been something. A principle unexplored, a design incomplete. We will never know for certain. A museum in Belgrade received much of the archive in 1952. The institution became the repository of his legacy, patents, photographs, personal effects that had survived scrutiny. Visitors today can see the artifacts of an extraordinary life. They can study his work and trace the evolution of his thought. What they cannot see is the man himself. The unusual, brilliant figure who held tomorrow in his hands and watched it slip through his fingers. For 50 years after his death, he was largely forgotten. Textbooks mentioned Edison and Marconi. The Serbian who made alternating current practical received footnotes at best. Then came the digital age. Something about his story resonated with new generations. The outsider who challenged the establishment. The immigrant who transformed his adopted country. The visionary cheated of recognition by those more commercially minded. His face appeared on shirts. His name became shorthand for overlooked genius. In 2003, an entrepreneur named his electric vehicle company after the long-dead engineer. The choice was deliberate, symbolic, a claim to legacy. Every car bearing that name reminds the world of the Serbian who was forgotten for so long. There is irony in this. The man who tore up a billion-dollar contract now has his name on a company worth hundreds of billions. The one who died in poverty is commemorated by vehicles only the wealthy can afford. He would probably not have minded. The technology was what mattered. It was always the technology. The admiration that has grown around his memory presents its own dangers. He has become a saint for some, an icon whose flaws are ignored. This does him no honor. He held views common among educated people of his era, but disturbing to modern sensibilities. He endorsed ideas about improving humanity through selective breeding that were mainstream in the 1930s, but have since been thoroughly discredited. He rejected certain scientific theories that have proven correct. His objections to Einstein's work were based on intuition rather than mathematics. He was wrong. He made claims that could not be verified, announced discoveries that could not be reproduced. Not everything he said was true. To worship him is to diminish him. He was not a god. He was a man, flawed, brilliant, unusual, and ultimately human. His achievements deserve celebration. His errors deserve acknowledgement. The whole person matters more than the myth. There is a photograph that captures something essential. He sits in his Colorado laboratory, reading calmly while artificial bolts crash around him. The exposure was long, the image carefully composed, the danger less than it appears. But the symbolism is perfect, a man at peace amid forces that would terrify anyone else. That was who he was. Someone who could remain calm in the presence of power that would kill ordinary people. Someone who saw the invisible architecture of reality and tried, imperfectly, to share that vision. The hotel room is empty now. The pigeons have found other windows, other sources of food. The notebooks have dispersed to archives. The patents have expired. The technologies have evolved beyond anything he imagined. But the lights are still on. In every city on earth, in every home and factory and hospital, the current flows. Alternating current, generated and transmitted according to principles he discovered in a park in Budapest, sketched in sand with a walking stick. He wanted to give the world free energy. He failed. He wanted recognition for his work. He received it too late. He wanted love, perhaps, in whatever form his unusual mind could accept. He found it only in a white bird that died in his hands. But he wanted, more than anything, to bring illumination to those in shadow. In this, he succeeded beyond any reasonable measure. Remember Pittsburgh? The torn contract? Now you understand. It was not naivety. It was choice. Ideas over money. Tomorrow over today. Solitude as the price for being true to himself. He gave everything. He received almost nothing. And yet, in the end, there is the image he would have wanted remembered. Not the old man feeding birds in the park. Not the bankrupt dreamer begging for funds. Not the forgotten figure dying alone. Instead, a young man standing at Niagara Falls, watching water thunder over the precipice as it has thundered for millennia. He is thin, intense, burning with visions no one else can see. Someone asks what he is thinking. He remembers a boy of 5, looking at a picture of this waterfall, telling his uncle that someday he would make it work for him. The uncle laughed, but the boy did not forget. He grew into a man who kept his promises, even when the world broke every promise it made to him. The water worked for him. The forces of nature answered his call. The shadows yielded to his light. The midwife said, "A child of darkness." His mother said, "A child of light." Both were right. Both were always right.